This episode is sponsored by DS, a team of makers, marketers, and entrepreneurs that help businesses transform their brand experience and unlock growth like never before. Are you a CMO, founder, or business leader looking to level up your brand and marketing? Head over to weareds.com and let's explore what is next for your business. That's weareds.com. Visit us to learn more. Hey, what's going on, entrepreneurs? This is Robert Roach, executive producer for Forward Obsessed. And if you are building businesses, you know that you never have enough resources to get everything done that you need to get done for your new business. All right, and that's why we're proud to say that one of our sponsors is Das Good. That's DAAS Good. Das Good is a done-for-you, creative, on-demand service for entrepreneurs. This is for businesses who need great creative without a huge budget and without a lot of time to focus on it. If you want to get the important things done like pitch decks, awesome branding, incredible websites, but you want to do it without the hassle, without the headaches, without the massive budget, then Das Good is for you. Head over to dasgood.design. That's DAAS good.design. Mention that Forward Obsessed sent you and save $1,000 off of your first month of service. Let us know what you think of them. We're excited to hear about it. And with that, enjoy the show. Remember, stay Forward Obsessed.
Welcome to Forward Obsessed, where we talk to breakthrough business leaders and rising entrepreneurs about their journeys, origin stories, and aha moments.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Forward Obsessed. I am so excited for this episode with Peter Thum. Peter Thum, if you're not familiar, he was the founder of Ethos Water, which he went on to go and sell to Starbucks. And now this isn't just another story of an entrepreneur who built and sold an awesome business. This is the story of someone who cares about mission, social impact, and really helping people and not just making a quick buck. Peter's story will inspire you, and you'll learn the twists and turns of building a company, turning an idea into a prolific company that ultimately has a giant mission, and then turning that mission into impact all across the world. You're gonna hear about the water crisis, you're gonna hear about developing countries, you're gonna hear about entrepreneurship, and then you're gonna hear come right back around to modern day AI. Peter is a prolific mind, a prolific business builder, and I can't wait for you to go through his trials, his tribulations, and how he traded his briefcase for bootstrapping a water-based business. I love this story, and you're gonna love it too. Please be sure to subscribe, like, and review on whatever platform. It helps us get the word out and spread this. It's your word of mouth that's gonna keep this show going for another 500 episodes, but we need your help. And please, if you haven't already, hop on forwardobsessed.com, grab our newsletter, and shoot us a note. Tell us a little bit. We respond to every single email on that website, forwardobsessed.com. Can't wait to see you there. Thanks so much for tuning into Forward Obsessed, and really enjoy this episode about the founder of Ethos Water. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Forward Obsessed. I'm so excited to have Peter Thum on the show today. As always, I'm your host, Pete Senna, joined by my co-host,
David Salinas.
Welcome, Peter, to Forward Obsessed.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
It's great to have you.
Where'd you come in from?
Came in from Manhattan.
Okay. So on our show in the very beginning, we like to get to try and find the kernel. Where did the entrepreneurship bug come from? We'd like to go back to your childhood. So I guess, where were you born? What did your parents do? That kind of stuff.
I was born in Boston.
Okay.
My folks met at Radcliffe and Harvard, respectively, as undergrads, and then they went on to grad school there.
Okay.
And not too long after my dad graduated from med school, he got drafted to go to Vietnam.
Oh, wow.
And then we arrived, and my dad was supposed to go work at a MASH unit in Vietnam, but they said, would you like to go with your family to Seoul, Korea instead? And so my dad decided, instead of going to combat, I'll take the job running an Army hospital surgical ward in Seoul. So
right out of med school.
Yeah, not too long after residency. Yeah.
So he's going from zero to running a hospital.
He went from
residency almost.
Residency to, yeah.
They don't teach you how to run a hospital in residency.
My dad was a pretty clever guy.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But they did, it was sort of like MASH. They made him a major so that he could, do the stuff he needed to do.
It was a great show. I haven't heard anybody bring that show up in a long time. Remember, man?
I do.
I didn't realize it was like a real thing.
My dad knew some doctors who were kind of like Hawkeye, and
that's awesome.
Yeah,
that's really cool. So then he was in South Korea. You spent how many years there?
About a year and a half.
Okay.
My dad was there longer at the beginning, and then again at the end.
Okay. So how old were you there?
2 and 3 years old. So I can remember little things. I was entrepreneurial at the age of 2.5 by accidentally unlocking a Jeep and crashing it into a wall. My friend and I were playing around, and I guess his parents were happy that I didn't run over him.
Yeah. Wow. Got it. Okay. And your mother did what? What she studied?
My mom was a teacher.
Okay.
So she was a teacher. She went to grad school for education, then went on and taught for most of her career, and then took over leading a private school.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when your father came back from service, what did he do? Did he go into the medical field?
It was interesting. He went into, he was a doctor at, I'm trying to think of the name of the company, big healthcare company based on a steel business, so Kaiser.
Okay.
Kaiser. So in Fontana, which was about an hour east of us in LA, Fontana was this steel town, and the people who owned Kaiser Steel basically started their own hospital for their workers, and that then launched this healthcare business, which, the steel business disappeared, and they became this giant healthcare company.
Like Kaiser Permanente? Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
And that was my dad's first job, and then he moved to another hospital and became chief of surgery there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's some entrepreneurialness to that, running a hospital for the Army, and then going into this facility and running surgery. He was pretty high up in these organizations.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably when he was in the Army, it was probably because of his talent as a surgeon. And I think later, as people grow and sort of accrue administrative responsibilities, maybe it's people who like it. I don't know. I was a young kid when my dad passed away. I can remember going on tours around the hospital on his rounds with him. But we never talked about why he had the job he had or what kind of responsibilities he had.
Did you have any other exposure to entrepreneurship from any other family members or anything?
No.
So let's just tap in for a second. How old were you when your father passed?
I was 14, so I came home from Pony League baseball practice, and my parents were both at home, and my dad and my mom said, we got to sit down and talk. My dad explained that he had liver cancer, and at the time, I was young enough that I didn't really know what that meant.
Yeah.
But as a surgeon, he knew that based on the disease, he actually got it as a result of operating on a South Korean soldier when we were in Korea. So he got hepatitis because he got poked during an operation, and that ultimately 11 years later led to cancer.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that there was a path, that was a common path.
Yeah. A lot of people who get hepatitis C, it could ultimately lead to primary liver cancer.
Wow. And that's a tough one. I just lost my brother a couple of years ago to pancreatic cancer.
That's what my mom died of 10 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Stomach cancers are really tough.
Yeah.
And there's not a ton of science there. So you were 14 years old. How long was the transition from when he got diagnosed to when he passed?
It was about 1.5 years. They did a big operation on him and removed a big chunk of his liver because he had a really big tumor.
Yeah.
And the liver is one of the only organs that grows back in your body, but the tumor was ensconced in the liver. So
yeah,
and it got into the basically by the time his liver had grown back, that he had chemotherapy, radiation therapy, but it didn't work.
Yeah, no, it's tough. It's really tough to fight. So, what was that like for you as a young man? Did he diagnosed at 14 when you were 14, or were you younger and he died when you were 14?
I think I was 12 and a half when he got diagnosed.
And how did that affect you mentally? Like I have a very distinct memory of how that changed my life.
I was trying to explain this to my daughter the other day, and I said that I tried to explain it's like carrying like a lead weight around. That there's a period of time where I think when you're young, it's hard enough just to be a kid who's going to be a teenager or a tween or whatever. But I think it's very isolating. You don't, most of your peers can't relate to what's happening to you. I remember meeting a girl when I was a freshman in high school, and her mother had died of cancer, and we became lifelong friends after that just because we had somebody else to talk to. But I think that was part of it. Also, I think maybe the seeds of entrepreneurship began for me there, because I think it changed the way that I thought about risk and what mattered.
Agreed.
And even though, as I went through high school and played sports and went into college, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. But I, now as I see my daughter going through school, and my current business, I deal with a lot of college students, talk to college students regularly. They're very focused on getting that job in finance or getting a job, whatever feels like it has the highest payoff over time. And I never really had, like you asked, exposure to people who thought like that or anything like that in my mind.
Yeah. And we had a guest on the show. He described it, and it was like a light bulb moment, as if you're in you're in a bowl with a bunch of goldfish, and then somebody takes you out of that bowl and puts you in a bowl that has no goldfish in it. And now everybody in that bowl is looking at you because you're now different, which is that you lost a parent. And I was 12 when I lost my mother, and that's really what it can feel like. And I think also you started to say this lead weight. I thought you were going to go, because I remember there was a specific time where I had to make a decision as to whether or not I was going to stay sad or if I was going to move on. And it took about 2 months to do that. And then I remember in the second month, I just said, if I go down, this is not a good path for me. At 12 years old, I was like thinking to myself, I'm depressed, and I have to let go, and I have to move on. And I think that stick-to-itiveness and that thick skin was built in that moment, where I was just like, this is the worst that's going to happen to me in my life, losing my mom, right at the time. And I had to make a decision, and I think that's what turned me into an entrepreneur. So it's interesting to see.
Yeah, I would say my version of that is like a cousin of what you're saying. I think that having goals, whether it's like playing on a team and wanting to win a championship, or that particular play, like I played football, like wanting to defeat my opponent in that particular play, whatever it was, wanting to do that thing well, I wouldn't say I became obsessive about it, but I became driven to do certain things that I liked well. And I've mostly focused on stuff that I liked, which I think is, if you talk to entrepreneurs, I think people who succeed are not generally trying to become rich. They're trying to get something done, whatever motivates them.
Yeah.
And then they do, most of them, you'll find they are obsessed.
Yeah.
With that thing, or a set of things, or a series of things.
Yeah, we get obsessed easily.
Yeah.
Yeah, we figure it out, and that's why the show's called Forward Obsessed. We're obsessed with a lot of stuff individually, and then everybody we meet seems to have that same mentality. And then you went into football, high school, college?
In high school, yeah, and then went on and played in college as well.
So I read in the show notes that you played in the NCAA for 4 years. You were a team captain at Claremont McKenna.
That's right.
So I was always curious. I mean, it might be self-explanatory, but what does it mean to be the captain?
I'm not sure. I mean, I only went to one college, and I was only on one team in college. But at my college, the team picks their captains, so the players vote and decide who they want to pick. I think when I was there, in the year I was there, we had 3, 2 on offense and 1 on defense. And
what did you play?
I played guard.
Okay.
And special teams.
Okay.
And then you do things like lead stretching and meetings sometimes, if there are player meetings, and go out for the coin toss at the beginning of a game. But I think it varies, depends on the makeup of the team and the way that the school looks at team captains and what they want from them.
Got it. I always thought it was like a motivational role. I wasn't sure like what what the position was. Is it truly leadership? Is it motivation? Like I think the most famous captain I think in sports is like Derek Jeter was like the captain of the Yankees for so many years, and he was willing to jump into the stands and crack his head open to catch a ball, and just always led with that passion for the game.
Right.
I was curious what that meant to you, and how did that shape you in any way? Do you look back at that time?
I think playing on a team and developing relationships with people. I mean, I talk on a regular basis, almost weekly, with teammates from college. We'll get on a Zoom, like during the pandemic. We started Zooming with each other almost every week.
Yeah.
And I talk to these guys regularly. And it's interesting, because I'm 56 now, and they're in their late 50s, guys who are older than I was when I was there. And the set of things we discuss is different.
Yeah.
But the relationships that we have are meaningful because we went through stuff together and worked hard together, in 100-degree weather in August, and won a couple of championships and share these things.
Yeah, that's awesome. There's stickiness to that for sure.
So what was the ultimate moment that happened where you decided that Germany was going to be a big part of where your future head is?
It's funny. I had 3 job offers when I was a senior in college, and I was just interviewing with companies that looked interesting. And, looking back, I don't know why they offered me jobs, because I was interviewing for these companies, but I wasn't really excited about any of them. They were flying me to places to do group interviews and so forth. And so there was a point at which I had to make a decision about what I was going to do. And the Berlin Wall had just come down in October, and I think it was probably February, and I just realized, I don't want to do any of these jobs. I want to go and have an adventure and learn something completely different. And so I decided I would move to Berlin and learn German. And at the time, I thought I might go into the Foreign Service, take the Foreign Service exam, because I had studied government and worked in Congress for a semester. But then when I actually ultimately moved to Germany and learned how to speak, the very beginning of German, I started, I ended up moving to Munich, started teaching English to professionals and students, and going through people's papers and helping them rewrite them and so forth. And they were paying me to do this. And then so I turned that into a job at Siemens teaching English, and realized that, it's funny. At the time I was trying to travel to Croatia just to tour the coast. And I kept going back to the consulate to try to get a visa, and they wouldn't give me one. And so finally this guy came out in the lobby and said, "Why do you want to go to a war zone?" Because there was a war taking place in Serbo-Croatia at the time, just the beginnings of it. But I said, "Look, the war isn't where I want to go. The war is, on the other side of the country, and I want to go here." And he said, "We can't give you one, but let's have a beer and talk about it." And so I met this guy for a beer at a restaurant, and he basically said, I don't think you want to go into the Foreign Service. And it just doesn't seem like something that you'd be happy doing. And so I was 22 at the time, and this guy's probably in his mid-40s. And so, but I was having a lot of fun, basically running my own language business. And so I ended up deciding, okay, being an expat here would be more fun. So I ended up talking to a buddy of mine who was one of my roommates in college. He was working for Gallo Winery at the time. I was kind of at the point where I realized I don't want to be an English teacher for the rest of my life. So I moved back to the States, took a job, interviewed for a job with Gallo in sales. 11 months later, I was their number 1 salesperson in Southern California in their grocery chain division, which is like Safeways and stuff like that. Yep. And so I was at the sales meeting, and the sales manager came up to me and said, "What do you want to do?" And he's like giving me a trophy, or I don't know what I got, some kind of award. And I said, "I want to go back to Germany and work for the company there." And he said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Do you speak German?" I said, "Fluently, yeah." So he said, come to my office on Monday at 7. So I went to the office, and he got on the phone with this guy and handed me the phone and said, go ahead and talk to this guy on the phone. And then I started speaking German with this guy, and we were talking about the wine business in Germany and so forth. And
he has no idea what you're saying.
He has no idea because he's from California, Denny Despars. And so Denny says, okay, that's enough. After about 5 minutes, takes the phone back and says to Frank, who's on the other end, can he speak German? And Frank said, yeah, he's fluent. And so basically it's like this guy can sell and he speaks German. So he said, okay, I'm going to put you in touch with the people at the winery. And they then, said, we're going to send you back to Germany, and you'll be the second person running our importing business there.
So I'm curious, before we get to Germany, so part of my sort of background is in branding, and we've worked with spirits and different things. I'm curious because when we were prepping for the show today, you described your background more as like brand marketing and brand strategies. What I'm hearing here is you became the number one salesperson here in the country before going on to Germany. I'm just curious.
In Los Angeles.
Which
was their biggest distributorship, but
yeah,
maybe 180 salespeople.
Amazing. Talk to us just a little bit about like, what was it about you and the way that you showed up and played that game to go from a guy who drops into this role to the number one spot? I just want to understand that arc, because that's not something that a lot of people can achieve in general. And that was just the beginning of this really interesting career you've had.
I would say that constitutionally, I'm not really a salesy kind of person. It's not something that I was excited to do, but it was a pathway to me to get what I wanted, which was to go get them to send me to be an expat in Germany.
So that was on your list.
So that was where I was headed. And I knew that being successful at it was necessary. So, and it just sort of became something I had to get good at. And so I realized, okay, what do I need to get good at this? And paid really close attention to all the stuff that they were teaching us and worked my ass off. And it wasn't something where I was cognizant of getting to that point on their list of being number one. It just was sort of the result of working really hard at it. But it's funny because it ultimately became, because it is something that I know how to do, I can just switch it on like that. And I think in business, probably any engineer or anybody would tell you that if you don't have a partner who can sell, you have to learn how to sell.
So talk to me so I can relate to that. In what ways did you realize? When David and I first started our first business together, I was the introverted kid who was afraid of sales, and not just afraid of sales, but I also didn't like it.
Yeah.
And now we all know, like, everyone sells, right?
Right.
It's so curious. Speak to your younger self. Speak to maybe even your daughter who might go into a role that has sales associated with it. What are some principles? What are some lessons that you can teach them? Because what we're going to find through the rest of today's conversation is so much of your ability to sell has been a catalyst for your breakthrough success in a lot of ways, as a consultant, as a founder, et cetera. But before we go there, folks, I'd just love to kind of learn some of those salient principles. How does one learn this when clearly this is not something that they wanted to do?
Right. Well, I think that if you want to be in business, every business starts with one person with an idea. And you may get a partner, but then those people, either you alone or you and your partner, have to get customers. And every relationship with a customer is a sales pitch. And so I think I got to it, sort of by backing into it. But I think what you end up realizing is that you have to determine that you are willing to break through any wall to get to the customers on the other side. And if you like it, it's good. But I think it's funny. I think people who are reticent about sales sometimes can become very good at it because the way that they do it doesn't come off as schmaltzy or fake,
Yeah.
And
people want to buy, they want to be sold to, right?
Right. And also, I think it makes it a lot easier if you believe in what you're doing. However you're creating value for people, if you believe in that value and you feel like I'm doing you a favor, it's not everybody. If you take 100 people, maybe only 3 of them really need your product. But if they're willing to pay $1,000 for it,
Awesome.
You just have to find the right 3 people.
I love that.
I want to dig in a little bit about I knew this was a path to get to Germany. Is that a pattern with you? Like, because not many people at that age are thinking steps ahead, or like, if I do this job really well, I can get here. From what we see, that kind of mentality it doesn't exist that much in the workplace. Like, what was it? Is that common for you to sort of say, like, if I do this, I'm going to get here? Do you always see steps ahead and plan for those steps ahead?
Yeah.
It's funny. I would say almost oddly enough, the opposite.
Yeah.
That I do what I am excited about.
Yeah.
So you follow the excitement.
Yeah. But that excitement, I can delay gratification, like that marshmallow test with their kids. They can put the marshmallow on the table, and are they going to eat it? I think I'm very good at delayed gratification. So I know I can have a goal that is far away, and there may be a rather circuitous path to getting there, or it may not be obvious to anybody else, but it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I think that's hard for most people.
Yeah, it's certainly the antithesis of this society we live in with the TikTokification and the Uberification. Everything's a button push away.
Yeah.
Fucking up our dopamine and serotonin, right? So if you can wait, if you can be patient, if you can delay that gratification, you can almost see a couple steps out.
Well, I think that's the big problem with today's society, is that like everybody's thinking about gratification as money.
Yeah.
So they're just jumping from job to job to get the bigger dollar amount, because money's instant, and money is the instant of like the success, right? So they're going from one place to the other to try and get the salary up, and they're using that as the metric versus someone like the chairman of the NFL, right? Who has been there for 20 years and now he runs the entire team, and he started off in like the mail department. I think that there's a pathway. I'm going to take over this organization one day, and I'm going to delay gratification, and then one day it's going to be me.
What I hear that is just like the ability to vision, right? Vision skills, I think, are critical for founders and CEOs to be successful and effective. Sounds like you were applying vision back when you were selling wine in one of your earlier parts of your career. Is that a fair kind of read on that?
Yeah, I think that I knew that I wanted to. Had it not worked out that way, I would have found my way back to working in Germany in a different way. I knew that I wanted to go work as an expat in Europe, and I had acquired some skills to do that. So I would have figured it out somehow if that avenue hadn't worked. But I think at the same time, which is another aspect of being entrepreneurs, like maybe you guys, when you bought this building for $1, you had a clear vision that it was going to be worth X amount at some point, but it might not have been. And I think that
you don't know David, because David is the kind of guy who will manifest. If he says something's going to happen, it's going to happen, even if he has to break the rule of physics to make it happen.
95% of the building was designed in the first 5 minutes of the idea. Like just right out of the gate. We're going to do this. It's going to have a beer garden, a restaurant, path on the river, a gym, co-working space. It was all there. It was like, we just had to fill in the blanks. That was the vision, and then getting it, and then slow gratification.
And dealing with all the naysayers that said it was not going to happen, it's impossible, and blah, blah, blah. Many of which come here and frequent here now, rather commonly.
Was it wine? Did you love wine? I'm just trying to figure out, like, what, because
interesting.
The reason why I ask is, like, as he mentioned, I am a sales guy, right? Like, people know, like, that is, I wouldn't call myself a sales guy. I think that's
development, growth.
But it minimizes, I have, in the world of business, of the skills of business, marketing, brand strategy, sales is one of them. For me, I could sell anything, but in order for me to really kick ass, I had to believe.
Right.
I had to love the product, right? And then I was always number one in every single organization, and then we started a business and we did really well. Were you a wine aficionado? Were you a connoisseur?
I went on a date in college, and I didn't really know anything about wine. And the girl said that she liked a particular type of wine, and we were young, so it was white Zinfandel.
Yeah,
and I thought it was Zinfandel. So I showed up at the date with this sour bottle of red wine, and that date didn't go very well. And that was probably the high point of my wine experience until well into my Gallo career. I got their perspective. So if you talk to Steph Gallo, who's their CMO now, and we were contemporaries in sales, so she went up through their sales organization, she would probably tell you that they make and sell products for people of all different tastes.
Yeah.
And they see no reason not to make a product for you if that's what you like.
Yeah.
Whereas if you were to go to some of the first growth houses in France, they would say we would never make what would equate to a jug wine.
Yeah. Well, they don't care about the customer. They care about the product.
Right.
Different.
It's a different position. It's a luxury position.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I understood that. It made sense to me. And I think that I've always gotten, the idea that you have to believe that there's a person out there who wants what you have.
Mm-hmm.
And some companies make something that, billions and billions of people want, like McDonald's.
Mm-hmm.
And other people make something that, they seat
100
10
Ferraris a
tables
year.
ahead.
Yeah, 100 Ferraris a year that
Right.
only a very specific person can
Right.
afford and have.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, you had this vision. Clearly, I think we all know, folks, he got to Germany. So from this point forward, where does Kellogg come into play? I mean, obviously one of the most prestigious business school programs, MBA programs. Like, what was the click in your head that said, you know what, I need to get this MBA thing for what I'm going to do next? Because clearly you're a vision guy. So break us down.
So I worked for this crazy guy at Gallo who at one point ran their whole operation in Europe. And I won't mention his name, but he was a tyrant. And they were on the cusp of replacing him.
Because he was a tyrant or because he was ineffective? Maybe column A, column B?
Maybe a combination. Well, I think he was effective, but there was somebody who was rising in the organization who was great, who had a great personality, who'd been through the program internally to go to business school. And he came and visited all the countries, including Germany. And I spent a day with him. And I realized if I want to elevate my game, I should go to business school so that I understand. I understood operations at this point because we had built we'd built warehouse systems to store things and things like that. But I wanted to get a holistic bird's eye view of a lot of different parts of business and realized that going to business school is probably the fastest way to get from where I was then to getting a better picture of things.
Why Northwestern? And why? Obviously, the Kellogg School of Management is one of the best in the country.
Yeah.
What made you choose that school?
I read up on a bunch of different business schools and went and interviewed there at various schools and was admitted to various schools. And I like Kellogg the best. I like the people.
Mm-hmm.
Kellogg has a very positive atmosphere. It's known for that. It's also, as opposed to Harvard, for example, which is a case method school, Kellogg is a teaching school. So they're like, we're going to teach you finance. We're going to teach you organization, ops. And we're going to teach you by going through the problems and working them through. And I realized that was just going to be better for me.
What I heard about Kellogg from some colleagues, I won't say their names, is Kellogg has elite education without elitism, right? And a lot of what he said to me, two people have actually said this, is they chose Kellogg specifically because some of the other schools, which we won't name, had elite programs, but were elitism is sort of like people act like they're better than everybody, and it was very much like talked down to. Versus, he said everyone felt more community driven at Kellogg. The programs were more like a teaching hospital and less like a here you're going to learn this from these cases. That's what I heard from a few people. Would you say that was true back then, or is that just like a sample size of two?
The guy who was the dean at the time when I was there was the one who had, his great innovation was, I want my students to work. I want the students at Kellogg to work in groups. So group work was something that he introduced as something that was adopted by
collaboration over competition. Right. I love that.
And so that was appealing to me. I don't know if he was necessarily emblematic of the way that Kellogg ultimately evolved in terms of its culture when I was there. But I think what you said was fair. It was a place that was, the mood was like, we're here going to business school and everybody gets along. And
cool.
Certainly, people were, I think business school students make obvious decisions about, I'm going to go to this school because it's in the top 10 or whatever. And you go to the best school that you like that you can get into. I now tell people, I think the question of whether education is even worth doing now because it's so expensive, and just the question of the payout after school is a fair question now because the cost of education is rising so much. I do say to people, look, if you can't get into a top business school, I'm not sure if it's worth it for you to go, particularly if you have parents who worked in finance or worked in consulting and you've been exposed, or who are entrepreneurs and you've been around business your whole life. It may not be the best use of your time and your money if you already know most of the nuts and bolts, or if you studied like electrical engineering.
Well, what I find to be interesting is I don't have an MBA, but I can say with confidence I can run circles around most MBAs, and it's because most of these programs, they list their syllabuses. So I could read the same shit that they're reading or learning at school. I think what I wish I got from a program like Kellogg or Wharton or Harvard is the network, is the community, is the being, around captain minds, in terms of that. That's the thing I think I didn't get from my education program. But on that note, take us through, how do you land at the top consultancy on the planet with McKinsey?
But before we go to McKinsey, apologies, I want to just go back just for a second, just for the audience. If you do go to business school, what should you get out of it? Like, is there anything you wish you did while you're in business school different?
Great question, yeah.
Like, we had a guest the other day. Well, I won't bias the conversation, but you tell me, like, do you think you got everything out of it, or should you have done something else while you were in business school to take advantage of the environment you were in?
When I went to Kellogg, I knew that I wanted to go to work at a top consulting firm when I left.
Okay.
So that I could get a lot of experience in those different areas that I'd studied theoretically 2 years or a year and a half, as it works out. And so I interviewed at McKinsey, Bain, Booz Allen, BCG, and got job offers from all these companies. And I picked McKinsey. I picked McKinsey because it had the biggest and best known global brand, and felt like that was something that, like, if you're a comedian, you've got Johnny Carson on your resume, and if you're a consultant, you have McKinsey. It's a ticket.
Yeah.
I'm a brain guy, and I have a question for you because it's always baffled me. I've worked with most of the consultants at these names that you just shared. They're all fantastic, right? They all have rigor and data and cases and really bright people, best and brightest all over the world. Why is McKinsey the brand that McKinsey is today, and the Booz Allens and some of the other names don't carry the same prestige or weight from a brand perspective? I just would love to understand your perspective, looking on the outside, applying at them, and then obviously spending some time at McKinsey. I just want to get your perspective on that.
I think that if you were to poll McKinsey people, you'd probably get a pretty good consensus around values, firm values, and that there's a way that you behave, a way that you think about the client.
Say more about that.
Solving the problem is the most important thing for the client. And the client's privacy is above all essential. You don't tell other people what you're working on. But
that almost kind of contradicts.
It's also, I wouldn't say not political, because obviously if somebody's been there for 20 years and they're a director, they have more power than a first-year associate. However, they have something called obligation to dissent at McKinsey, where if you disagree with somebody, you're obliged to say so. So if you're working on a problem and you think that the way that problem is being solved is not the best path, you're obliged to tell people, I don't agree with what we're doing here.
So it's very much like a Bridgewater meritocracy where you have to share openly. Got it. But still, so it's interesting. So great core values, awesome. Big part of brands that succeed. Big sort of sworn to secrecy model to protect the client's privacy. But I'm curious, why is McKinsey the first name that rolls out of somebody's mouth typically when they think about consultants in most walks and talks and circles versus some of the others? If they all have great people and they all have great ability to solve client problems, why is the McKinsey brand leaps and bounds ahead of some of the others, just from your vantage point?
I think some of it is timing. When they were founded, their decision to aggressively move to, first of all, they set up the idea of the law firm model for consulting, and they aggressively expanded from the United States to Europe and to other countries as partners, founded new offices. I think each office is its own independent, I don't know if it's a PLC or an LLC, but it's an independent business that then contributes money back to the whole.
Got it.
And I think that they're really interested in enabling people who work within the firm to have their hero's journey. So if you are really great at something, let's say you're a leader, to go back to your point about, how do you lead in football? If you're a leader and you want to run an office, then they want to move you in that direction. If you want to run a practice, they want you to move in that direction. They want people to do what they're good at.
That makes sense. So what I'm hearing is a little bit of differentiation in terms of how they took that model, a little bit of business model innovation in terms of pushing it and scaling and growing, and a lot of sort of internal support, values-driven support that aligns the people inside the firm from the first-year associate all the way up to the partner. So
right. Like also, if you look at, it was interesting, as somebody who'd worked in a company that was a private company, but a big one, like I think when I was there were maybe 7,000 consultants, and now there are 20 or something like that. But I remember when Goldman Sachs went from being a partnership to being a publicly traded company, which meant that I think every partner at the time got like $130 million payout or something. But then they were a public company. So they lost that control that they had.
Right.
So everybody got rich at the time, but the firm changed, and I think not for the better.
Got it.
And so McKinsey profits are divided on the basis of interest shares for directors. But when directors leave the firm, their interests return to the firm.
Right.
They don't keep them.
So speaking of a lot of changes during your time as a consultant at McKinsey.
And I should say, I was only there for a brief period. And I, in a way, like to go back to what you guys asked me about, I went there to learn. And I feel like I got a lot more from going there and learning, and sitting at the knee of that.
It's like getting paid for
partnership.
business school.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like it was like a much more intense real world version of business school.
We actually, I can't speak for Pete, but I know for me, we owned a marketing agency. We did brand design with brand strategy, marketing strategy. And for people always ask me, like, why did you go into this business? And it was because I can say that I've learned so much by working with 1,000 companies in 20 years, right? I put butts in seats at the US Open. We've promoted projects for Lady Gaga. We've sold $2 million fuel cells. We've sold drinks. We've had so many different types of projects that we've been able to get into the table and like learn about the business, the supply chain, and learn about the ideas, the brand story, the origin stories, and so on and so forth. It was like an MBA for us. That's why he says he can run circles around them, is because we've been at the table with everybody from the startups that have no money to Unilever that has a ton, right? And everybody in between to really learn. So I can see how that extension in McKinsey was like just extending your Northwestern education, and that's I think that's smart and exciting.
So take us through. So you're there, and one of the things I've always valued about friends of mine that are at McKinsey versus some of the others is the consultants there always have had like a mindset of entrepreneurship. And I think, one of the things I always say to our team is we always strive to be makers, marketers, and entrepreneurs, right? And I feel like there's a lot of parallels to that with the way that McKinsey thinks. And so you're there, you're working on a soft drink manufacturer, I think, at the time, when this aha moment happens.
Right.
And we always love that aha moment on Forward Obsessed here. So take us through that journey. You're working on this particular client. You don't have to divulge anything proprietary, but then something hits you. And ultimately, that spark that hits you is what unfolds the rest of this really cool story that you're about to tell us.
Well, it's interesting. The spark took a year, and it was two different successive projects that I was working on. The first was actually that I was asked to come from London, where I worked, to go to Cape Town to work on a merger of 2 wineries. And that was supposed to take about 6 weeks. And then they asked me to go out, and after we had done this brand integration, they were going to merge these sales forces. And so we basically had to figure out, how do you right-size the sales force? And I spent another 5 months there doing that. And it was during that period of time that most of the money that this company made was made. The population is 90% Black South Africans and about 10% white South Africans. I'm not sure now, but at the time it was. And so most of the products that were sold by this company were sold into townships. And so I was going out into townships with their salespeople and going to what they call shebeens, which are these illegal, extra legal bars that are run in these places where liquor gets bought and brought in. And so I'm going to these places at night and watching these products be consumed and seeing, how other brands are competing with the brands of these 2 companies. And I traveled all over South Africa to do this. But the thing that was vital to the idea for Ethos Water was that I got exposure for the first time in my life to people who were living on, dollars or pennies a day. People who really didn't have houses or running water or sewage or electricity. So they would run some kind of, they would run an electrical line off of the main power grid that wasn't even legal in, so that they could light a room. And they had houses that were built out of garbage that other people had thrown away. And so you probably have seen townships either in news coverage or maybe you've been to one. But that experience and left me thinking about this division of people who are living in poverty and people who weren't, and working on a McKinsey team for a wealthy company in the country at the time.
Gateway was probably more than their 2 years of their life's salary, right?
The level of poverty in the United States and what you see here in the States versus like the level of poverty you see in Africa is,
or developing countries for sure.
Different.
Yeah. If they woke up in the United States being poor, they'd be like, oh, you get free this and free that. And, we have water and bathrooms, and it's completely different.
So those little micro experiences that I observed on a broader scale, the fact that there were just people walking everywhere carrying buckets. And there was one day where I was driving, I was near Durban in South Africa, which is on the east coast. And I was driving along this dirt road, and there was a woman with a bucket perched on her head walking the other direction. And I realized, she's going to be doing that the rest of her life. And then fast forward back in the UK, months later, I was assigned to a project for a soft drink manufacturer, and they were basically trying to restructure the company and figure out, how do we make money in this business? And there's a lot to the grocery business in the UK that makes it not great for people who produce consumer goods. But part of what I was doing was looking at this bottled water business. And I'd never really thought about bottled water much. But, they have these huge shelves of the sort of private label brands, and then brands that are made by companies like Coke and Pepsi, just a notch above that. And then there was this weird little group of brands like Evian and Fiji and Voss that were incredibly expensive. And it made no sense. Like, why are people buying luxury water? Mm-hmm. And so I realized one day I was on the train going home, because this project was in the Midlands. And I realized, you could make a product, a brand, where the reason for buying it wasn't because it came from somewhere far away, but rather because you were doing something to help somebody else get water. And so that was the fundamental idea for Ethos. And I wrote it on a napkin in the dining car on the train, basically the rudiments of the idea. And I didn't have the name in my head then, but that was the basic idea. And so I knew from looking at this business, like, what are the economics of these products? And had figured out, okay, how are these companies making money? So the question was, can I charge the same as Evian or Fiji, but replace their shipping costs with a donation to fund water programs in developing countries?
And for the guests here, I just want to make sure to add this for those listening on the show. Purpose-driven brands are all the rage today, 2024. But you started Ethos in 2001, right?
Yeah.
So just to take us back for a second, that was a pioneering thought back then, which is, everyone talks about Tom shoes and different brands, but like in 2001, there were not a lot of folks that were taking on, global water crises and that sort of thing. So I'm curious, as you're sketching that idea on the train, back from the away from the Midlands, what starts to coalesce for you where you realize not just the economics of this business, but the emotional construct of this business and this brand is one that's going to really move people? Because it certainly moved me. And again, selfish alert, I'm a big Starbucks fan, so we'll get to that. But talk to us about that, because that to me is pioneering, and I love pioneering thought.
Well, it's interesting because I also knew a lot about the grocery business because of working in the wine business. And so even though there's a lot of difference between the grocery multiples business and how it works in the UK and in the US, just for lots of reasons, but geography mostly, the most important thing for brands is to be able to stand out and to have something that, if you want to earn your way into something that's commoditized like a water business, you have to have a reason for existing that means something to the customer. Otherwise, you're playing a game where all the big guys have all of distribution is everything. And then on top of distribution, it's communication. And so if you can't get in the truck and you can't shout loudly, you're going to fail.
What's funny, one of the things I think about, we work with a lot of challenger brands, and one of the things that I'm always met with is we don't have the McKinsey kind of budgets, right? In a lot of cases. So one of the things that I always say is the least expensive way to win and the most impactful way to win is either create the category, own the category, or just differentiate like crazy. So clearly, I think differentiation was one of the superpowers of Ethos early on too,
right?
When juxtaposed against the Coca-Colas and the Pepsis of the world, right? So talk us through that. Like, how did you bring that to bear, and more than just a message, or more than just a way of giving back to this?
So, I realized that the rudiments in that category, where you have to have a cool product, the packaging has to look nice, because if you take private label bottled water, it's a plastic tube with a piece of paper around the middle that says water.
See a sameness, right?
And then a level up from that is a nicer looking bottle from Coke or Pepsi with a kind of a cool translucent label that says Aquafina or Dasani or something like that. And then above that, as you move up, then you get into packaging, which is kind of like, it's luxury water basically, where the product, the object in and of itself has meaning. Now, the meaning of I'm extracting water from Mont Blanc or from an island in the Pacific is very different to the end consumer than the meaning of you're helping somebody else. But I looked at it and realized, okay, companies like Newman's Own and The Body Shop and Ben & Jerry's have been able to carve out market shares of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%. So if you can do that in water, that's a serious business. And the question is, how do you get from the idea to actually making that happen? And I realized, that I have to solve the same problem that everybody else has to solve. I just have to get there differently. So you have to get distribution. So I ended up downloading like all the business school cases from Harvard Business School about Paul Newman, how he set up his business, and Ben & Jerry's, I think, had another case, and another business school had written one about Anita Roddick. So I read all these business cases about how these people had built these companies, and ultimately they were very different from what I wanted to do. Anita Roddick had organic as a point of differentiation, and Ben & Jerry's had ice cream, which in and of itself with wacky flavors like Chunky Monkey or whatever it is.
Garcia.
Right. And Paul Newman his face was on the bottle, and he was like the most famous actor from 1950 onward. So there were a lot of advantages that they had that our product didn't. But so the question was like, how do you build a distribution for the right people, that 3 out of 100 who are a good fit for what you're doing, and how do you get them to be embraced and shout about it? So it was clear to me, this product has to look good. it has to be in channels where people will buy it in very limited number of places and then get publicity without any expenditure.
So I want to do something here, which is, Dave, you seem to be the one that always takes us through the early roots, the fundraising side of things. You got this big idea, and at the time, you're a consultant.
Right.
So I want to understand, how do you go from a consultant with an idea on a napkin to starting this business, fundraising, that sort of thing? So Dave, take us to the sort of seeds of entrepreneurship here.
Yeah. So I guess right from the idea, what was your next step when you were like, when you had that aha, I think I know what to do here? What was your thought process? How did you continue?
So I was in the middle of like a 10-week project when this came up. So I wrote this like a business plan, like 2 pages of just, this is the idea, and put it down, and then came back to it and kept coming back to it and started spending all my time outside of work working on this thing. And I became obsessed. And then I bought some wine and sent out an email to a bunch of my colleagues and said, hey, on Friday night, I'm going to have, wine and cheese, and I'm going to do a focus group about this idea. So then I just had a flip chart and just had value propositions with just like, this is what this product, would you buy it?
What was your goal of that meeting?
Just to get a gut check about, would anyone in this room want to buy this thing instead of something else? So I had, private label water.
So perfect concept.
Just a basic, is there any interest in this at all?
But so there was no other side, sort of like maybe they're investors, maybe they want to join me. It was just like, I just want to get some consumer feedback.
Just some other human beings who are not me saying,
fair.
Yeah, that's something I would buy.
Okay.
And then I got a guy I worked with who worked in marketing research. He was a marketing research scientist at McKinsey to help me put together a survey. Mm-hmm. And then I sent out that survey to all of the people I knew on my email list.
Gotcha.
And I said sort of, what is tick the box? I'd never buy this. So I went from focus group to getting some numbers, and I got enough top 2 box responses that it was like, okay, this is about what this would be. And that number then was kind of if I can get this in front of people, this is the number of conversions that I get.
Got it.
And all of this happened within the period of about a month.
Are you doing it all by yourself?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I also knew that this was not going to work in the UK.
Why?
Population was too small, and the relationship between like the way that the British people felt about charity and the way Americans feel, it's just different. Mm-hmm. And I was also not from the UK. Mm-hmm. So outside of McKinsey, I didn't really have a network.
Yeah.
And I also had read like Snapple's business case and all these cases about beverage brands, and felt very strongly like the size of the United States is 5 times the size of the UK. Mm-hmm. So it makes a lot more sense. And if I move to New York, it's just an easier place to establish a brand like a Snapple or Apple and Eve or one of these beverage brands. Mm-hmm. There's like a history of Americans starting beverage brands, out of the back of their station wagon.
Got it. Did you recruit any like early employees, co-founders?
I did. My business school roommate, Jonathan, so one of the things that I realized after having tried for a year to start this was I couldn't find anyone who wanted to invest.
Okay.
So I would go to these conferences that were about, social impact and stuff, and people were in sort of 2 categories. They either were really philanthropists who were just giving money away and they weren't interested in business ideas, or they were only interested in business ideas that were like
nonprofit.
No, actually not. They were interested in like, oh yeah, I want to invest in a business that's going to invent a drug to cure cancer. So they were really the
deep tech, deep pharma, biotech.
Right.
Yeah.
So the positive social side effect was kind of hand wavy more than serious. And I think it was mainly because of what you said. Like at the time, the people who got these businesses to work, like the Ben and Jerry's or the Anita Rocks, they were all a little crazy. And so I think it was me deciding like, am I crazy enough to do this? And I think ultimately the answer was yes. But it was also because I knew so much about the business of beverage and grocery. And even though wine comes in a different, it has a different effect on you than water, it comes in a bottle and you have to sell it in a store. One of my friends, actually business school classmates, who's one of my investors now, said to me at the time, you're going to go compete with the biggest companies in the world that put liquid in bottles. And another business school classmate said, this is the dumbest idea I've ever heard. So I got a lot of feedback like that.
That's good feedback, though. It's better than people just kissing your ass.
Yeah, I think most of the people who either didn't respond or said this is unwise.
Yeah. Okay.
So now at this point, you're living in New York.
I moved to New York, and my co-founder was in LA.
And you're burning through your own cash at this point.
Yeah, and not a lot of it.
You had a girlfriend when you left Europe, right?
Yes.
You left her?
Yes.
Is she with you today?
No.
So that didn't work out. She didn't like that idea.
Well, we stayed together for a while, but I became married to my business.
Yeah,
I was
obsessed with the business.
Yeah, I was working.
My first love.
I was working 20-hour days, and I didn't have time to think about anything other than, eating and sleeping and working.
That'll ruin a relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if the other person's not even on your continent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Quite literally.
Yeah. So you went, and then through these surveys and through these questions, one of the people from Northwestern said to you, hey, I want to join. I like this idea.
This was my roommate.
So you were closer.
And he had been in politics, and to me, he was like, he worked for the Clinton administration. Mm-hmm. He had the perfect network at that time for this business. Kind of people left of center who believed that, the world can be better, and
it's very Californian type of mindset, right? And a lot of
conscious capitalism.
Yeah.
He's actually from Connecticut.
No, but ultimately,
which is also the East Coast California,
right? There, yeah. But I think through sort of a twist of fate, right? You end up in California randomly, right?
I did. Ultimately, we were going to do the business in New York, which I thought, and to this day, I still think that probably is the best place to start a business like that. Where you can, all the customers and all the stores are, bodegas, everything is walkable. But his wife, they got pregnant. And so it was like her parents lived half an hour away and they weren't coming to New York anymore. And so I had to decide, okay, I think that we will make this work, and that he has the network to raise the money. And so it's more important to go where the business leads and where the opportunity goes than to be fixed on where the company should be located. Because we still had to raise money. There wasn't a single bottle of this product produced yet.
Right. So I'm surprised that he had the network. Is it that he had the network, or that you were just not good at raising capital? Because I'd imagine, and this is what I'm reading, you're born in Massachusetts. You've got a connection to good schools. You went to college. You went to Northwestern. Your network is going to be pretty robust at that point. Why were you not able? Because you said you couldn't raise capital on your own.
I think there were a few things. I think one of them was something that I already talked about, which is this idea of philanthropists who are talking about social impact, but not as it goes through business.
Yeah.
At the time, there was something called.
So were you just choosing the wrong people to try and get capital from?
I wasn't really choosing. I was talking to anybody I could talk to.
Got it. Okay.
So, and it could have been also me pitching. I came to the conclusion that the biggest mistake I was making was not unlearning some of the things that, like you said this earlier about access to resources. One of the two of you said, like, McKinsey people their clients have millions and millions and tens of millions of dollars to communicate what they're doing. But as an entrepreneur, you have to build the thing.
Bootstrap.
And I was trying to raise money without the thing built. And that was true until I got to California, when we were pitching people in California through Jonathan's network as well. And that was also not working. And we went up to pitch a bunch of people in the Bay Area who were all these sort of tech people who had succeeded and were interested in social impact, and met with them, and also, Zip. And so what I realized, it was raining and we're sitting there in the car, and I said, you know what, this is not working. And I got out a notebook or something, and I said, okay, just with a pen, I wrote down this, we need $10,000 to start this company. So we'll put in $10,000 and I can produce the product and get it into stores for $10,000. And so we went back to LA. I went and found, now I had already talked to some people about producing the product, but the answer that I had gotten was from people who produced like Safeway water. So we'll sell you a truckload, but we won't sell you a pallet. And so I had to figure out, how do I make a pallet of this product? So I found this guy who had a beverage manufacturing facility called Chameleon Beverage, where he produced private label water for like golf clubs and restaurants and stuff, and changed the label, but the bottle was always the same. And I went to him and I said, if I brought you a bottle with a label already on it, could you fill it? And he said, okay. I gave him a few examples and he said, yes. So then I went to a guy who had a blow molding facility. Blow molding is how you make plastic bottles from these little sort of plastic pickle things.
Yeah.
So you put hot air into it, it expands the bottle. And I found this guy who had a blow molding facility, and he had this warehouse filled with smart water bottles, but the smart water guys never paid him for them. So I said, can I buy these from you?
Wow.
And so I bought, 10,000 bottles from him. And then I bought the labels that I needed. I bought 10,000 labels, which are these clear plastic self-adhesive labels. I rented a truck, drove the bottles to this labeling facility where they had this labeling machine, and with the labels, dropped them off, and then took this rented truck back. Then after they finished labeling my bottles, I went back out with another U-Haul truck, drove them to this facility, and then the guy started filling my product. I said, I only want you to fill, I think, like 3 or 4 pallets worth. And so that was the first. So then my friend from college, Pete Germanian, Pete is he owns a huge rug manufacturing and distribution company. This is an ad for you, Pete. G.A. Germanian's 4th generation company. They stored all my extra stuff in their warehouse, like 2 blocks away from the water bottling facility.
Yeah.
So bottles, labels. Once the product was finished, we stored it next to all their rugs and stuff. And he did this as a favor for me. So we weren't getting extra costs. Storage costs.
So you hacked your way into the water.
And having
into the water.
Yeah, I basically had to figure out, like, how do I make a beautiful product for nothing?
So every no you got, you figured out either a way to go through it or around it or over it, so that you could figure out how to launch this business.
Correct.
Tenacity. That is the story. That is the obsession that makes people. That's forward.
And you guys asked a question earlier. You're like, what was that sticking point where that? And maybe this isn't what you meant, but like that moment of terror.
Yes, we did.
So, have you guys spent time in LA?
Yes.
You know the 10 freeway? It goes east toward Palm Springs.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up out there. That's where I grew up in this town called Claremont, and I was driving out of downtown Commerce, which is this manufacturing gross place in South LA. And I'm driving in this truck filled with bottles east, where I'm going to drop them off at this guy's labeling place. And it's about 5:30 in the morning, and the westbound side of the freeway is just bumper to bumper. And there's nobody on my side of the freeway, not a soul. I'm driving this truck alone, I used to work at McKinsey. I used to...
You traded your briefcase for your business, yeah.
I could have gone into private equity. Yeah. And I'm driving this truck filled with bottles, and the sun is coming up over the horizon, and I thought to myself, I'm either right or I'm just fucked. And I just, I'm already on my way. So I
It's almost like a movie. It's almost like made for a movie. It's picture this. I picture like this empty road and just this one little truck on there.
Well, it might be like the Mark Echo moment, right? To Made in America.
For this moment, can we edit that into like a picture of a bumper to bumper traffic and a truck on the other side of sun rising?
I'm pretty sure we can figure it out. We got a pretty good
generative art. We're going to get you a picture of that. We're going to make it. It's going to.
So this is still before we had any customers, and before we had any investors.
So you got $10,000 worth of bottles.
Bottle $10,000 in the bank, which is now being turned into bottled water.
Got it.
And this is where, so my supposition that Jonathan's network was right worked because his network was politics, but it was also politics in LA. And it was a host of different weird people who were all connected to sort of democratic politics. One of whom was a couple of whom he knew through his first job after business school, who became our first two investors, Ari Engelberg and Stephen Coltai, who I'm still in touch with to this day. Stephen and I talked very recently. They were our first two investors, but they invested after we made the product. So we made the product. Another person
now they could see it.
Right. So those guys were interested in the business, but we hadn't yet gotten them to invest. But they connected us with Fred Siegel.
Speaking about luxury water.
Yes. A retailer in West LA that became famous for selling jeans in the 60s. But they have a cafe there, the cafe at Fred Siegel. And so Fred Siegel...
Was there a Barney's at the top of it back in the day?
There was a Barney's nearby. There
okay.
might have been one in the West Hollywood branch.
Yes.
I think there was a Siegel upstairs. Wasn't there? Barney's had a cafe upstairs too. All the big guys made cafes. After Siegel, he was the innovator.
Yeah.
So the strategy was we have to get into natural food stores.
Yeah.
So independent natural food stores will lead us to Whole Foods.
You were going to Whole Foods the whole time.
Yeah.
Got it.
So we would have gone into Whole Foods, but that was the first channel because that was going to be the easiest one. Then coffee shops would lead to coffee chains.
Yep.
Hopefully Starbucks, but if need be, like Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf, Hortons, all these competitors.
Yep.
So if you get Starbucks, you have one answer. If you have to go the other route, it's going to take you 10 years and you're going to get 20% the volume.
You also cracked at that time, what we now know today as the LOHAS consumer, right? Lifestyles of health and sustainability, right? Like at that time, that was like a very burgeoning, like strong CAGR growth, like very unique segment. Like nowadays, it's like people just think of that like the Whole Foods kind of mindset, right? But back then, there was like this interesting growth inflection point. I'm curious, like why was Whole Foods the one on the thing? Was it because of the purpose connection with Ethos, or was like what was the thing?
I was also going to say before you answer that. Reflecting back, do you think that this strategy would have worked in New York? Because I think in 2001, 2002, New York wasn't ready for a LOHAS type of a product because I'm from New York City. New York, California was much more crunchy, much more into bettering the world, right?
Yeah.
You had a much higher likelihood to sell a product that gave back and that had this philanthropic position to it in Cali in 2002. Obviously, it's come across to the East Coast now.
Right.
But do you think it would have taken off as well in New York if you had launched there? Say you got the money and went to the East.
Yeah, I think you may be right. I think to answer both of these questions at the same time, I think that Whole Foods was the place because Whole Foods was like a grocery store and a green market combined, where people are like, going around and they're interested in trying different products. People are buying like, if you go into, even to this day, even though Amazon still owns it, if you go into their kind of pharmaceutical product section or whatever.
The soap made by a apothecary place down the street versus,
So I think that you had the right people with the right mindset, the right attitude there. I think that they probably would have been there in New York as well. In those stores. But I think to your point, I'm not sure if the distribution around would have sustained it. And
yeah, I don't think so. I don't even think Whole Foods was in New York until 2000, probably till 2010, 2000, right?
I feel like
Were they?
They had
a small presence, but I think the juxtaposition that I'm seeing here is like, you know, I don't want to say sort of like bleeding hearts, but I feel like there was more of a bleeding heart consumer archetype in and around the California region at that time versus like the East Coast, like hustle bustle.
Right.
There was a little bit more of a connection to, you know, the where it comes from, the sourcing. Even back then, you know, like with fabrics and certain things were coming up in the LA kind of vibe. You know what I mean? So
the Lojas community probably existed when we were starting Ethos. I was just not really aware of it. And then conferences started being held, of course, in the years after Ethos was bought. But then I was too busy to be thinking about that.
So you made a pretty interesting decision. You know, when you think about such a purpose-driven brand at that time, nonprofit, for-profit, ultimately you made the decision to go for-profit, but I'd imagine that was a fairly tenuous decision for you to make, you know, sort of on the line with that vision.
The decision was made for us. I tried to start a nonprofit and did all the research to figure out how you do this. And it's actually not very easy. Like it wasn't clear how Paul Newman did it based on reading his the Harvard case about him. But what happened was that he was already a human brand. So basically he said to his distributors and to his manufacturers, you're going to give me 6% of sales. And he had no operations and no employees. So he was always cash flow positive. So for him, it was very easy to say, I'm going to give 100% of the profits to this because he was profitable immediately.
You also didn't need the money, right? You're burning through your savings from McKinsey. Right. He's a famous actor that's got, you know, plenty of wealth.
Right. So the same is true of museums. Like if there's a gift shop in a museum, that's a business. But the museum's overall revenue comes mostly from philanthropy. And so they have rules about how much of your revenue from a nonprofit can come from a business operation. And so that was also a problem. So I went through all this mishigas of like, can I have a company owned by a nonprofit and how big could it get? And then it ultimately was just driven by the investors. And the money, we ultimately found the people who wanted to invest in a business that was trying to do good. And that may have been to some extent my co-founder and the connections he had. I think maybe timing as well. You know, I think that the idea was rising around us of some of these businesses may work, and also us having, you know, just making the thing. You could go, if we wanted to have someone invest in the company, you could go and look at it on the shelf in a store.
Right.
And see it being sold and see bottles missing. And that became very important. Sort of the proof point of we're shipping this product to these stores. I was actually delivering the product initially. I borrowed my mom's friend's station wagon because I didn't have a car that was big enough to move stuff. So I had this Volvo station wagon where I would go and borrow it and drive, fill it up with water, and then deliver it to the back of, you know, the Whole Foods when we first got our first Whole Foods. And I would throw the cases up onto the loading dock. So everybody else had a semi, and I was throwing cases out of the back of a station wagon.
I love that story because Kara Golden, the founder of Hint Water, is a friend of mine, and she was telling me stories how when she was pregnant, she was like loading up the Jeep, you know, early days bootstrapping and like physically manually delivering the stuff to Whole Foods herself and her husband and her team. But it's just so interesting to see how the humble bootstrapper beginnings of this business started. So clearly Whole Foods was a catalyst for you. We'll talk about Starbucks in a second.
How much after the 10,000? How much did you wind up raising to start the business?
We raised 75,000 after that.
That's it.
Yeah.
And who were the investors?
Ari Engelberg.
Oh, you mentioned that, yeah.
Who had started stamps.com.
Got it.
And Stephen Coltai, who also is a tech entrepreneur and sold his business.
Got it.
And they were friends with Jonathan, and they were all in. Jonathan had worked for a tech company, but it didn't go great after that, after business school, but he knew these guys through a bunch of guys who would get together and have breakfast.
So these were relatively small angel checks that were
Correct.
easy for them to stroke. They liked the idea.
Compared with how well they'd done, yeah.
But they still needed to see it.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what happened is that, again, through the set of people in LA, one of the people who Jonathan knew was a buyer for Whole Foods and said, you guys we'll put you in some individual stores. And that, interestingly, at the time, Whole Foods at the time was a very different company. Now that Amazon owns it, what we did at the time would not happen to
Store managers were kings back then.
Correct.
You could build that one-to-one relationship. They would carry your stuff versus now it's a democratized decision or no, it's a centralized decision. It's
Correct.
Wrong word, but yeah.
So that business couldn't be started the way that we did it today. Because they also had buyers at stores who could buy stuff like mama and popcorn from down the street. They could buy stuff like that, and that's not the case anymore. And so I think, getting back to your question about Whole Foods, I think it was like these locations that had all the right things, the ingredients, the supply relationship with the individual store where you could sell to the store itself, the right kind of buyers, the sort of experimental environment, the kind of left-leaning, holistic, LOHAS health environment. All that stuff was happening then and has since largely, I think, dissipated and would not have been possible anymore. But we built, at first we had independent natural food stores, then we got some Whole Food stores. Then they said, look, we're selling a lot of this stuff. We were doing promotions in the stores where we would go in our T-shirts and hand out water for free to people, say, okay, you're buying one, you can have one from us on us. And so we would do promotions in all the stores we were in, and we would build these large displays of water. We bought boxes for our product. We didn't have them boxed that way. We actually bought display boxes with the images of kids from developing countries on them. And the boxes actually cost more than the product. But then we would build grocery ends out of these boxes that were beautiful. And then the stores started building displays on our behalf because they liked us. Mm-hmm. And so I think we just created a vibe with the people in the store and the customers where we got noticed by the headquarters, and they said, we're going to start sending our trucks to your facility. So I was able to retire the station wagon and we bought a truck and then we hired this guy who was a guitar player, and he was, would drive our truck when it wasn't parked and deliver on our behalf.
Yeah.
So we had Whole Foods, which is a real business. And then we had been chasing Starbucks for a year. So we went up and met with the people in there. We had natural food stores, coffee shops, and stores that were sort of like the precursor to a 7-Eleven, bodega-like stores.
All off the initial $75,000. You never raised additional capital?
Oh, the additional capital came after that. So
after that,
we're trying to get into Starbucks. We'd fly up to Seattle a couple of times, meet with, excuse me, we meet with their, now Starbucks is a big company by this point, 7,000 stores. We meet with their corporate social responsibility people. We meet with their strategy people who are all ex-McKinsey people. So that's how we got to meet with them. We met with people in their retail product group, which is like buying in consumer goods to sell in the store, not just coffee. So we'd met all these people, and it became very clear, if you want to do anything like this at Starbucks, you have to meet with Howard Schultz. And so that was a barrier for us because we didn't know how to get to Howard Schultz. So then comes the question of money, because we're starting to run out of money. We can't get that third investor. And so again, Jonathan's network helps because he knows someone who knows a guy at TED. And so this guy who's a TED attendee, TED Conference. And at the time, the TED Conference was tiny, much smaller than it is now, very kind of mom and pop feeling as well. And the guy who had bought TED from the original inventor of TED was sort of experimenting with all these things.
Is that Chris Anderson?
Chris Anderson. Yeah, so Chris gets on the phone with us and says, what are you guys doing? Tell me about it. So we explained Ethos to him. He said, you guys can be a sponsor of TED. And we said, well, who are some of the other sponsors? Oh, General Motors. And so he lists off all the Apple. So he lists these huge companies, and we said, well, we can provide water for everybody.
We had no money.
So we again rented a U-Haul truck because our truck was too slow. So we rented a U-Haul truck and filled it with water and produced the product for the conference, and then produced all these T-shirts as well. So we stood at the time, everybody had to come in Monterey up this escalator to go to the TED talks, because the talks were on level 2. And so everybody who was getting off the escalator, we would give them a bottle of Ethos and a T-shirt. And then we had this, during the breaks, we would have a table and we would talk to everybody. And we had a list of all the people who were attending TED from the website. And we picked off all the billionaires and all the multimillionaires. So we knew all these people, these are all the people we have to talk to, because they're the people who could imagine this thing might be able to work and I could help it. And so we had a conversation with Steve Case, who's on the East Coast. Yeah. And we had a conversation with Pierre Omidyar. And both of them followed up with us. And Pierre Omidyar was closer. So the flight, it was going to be faster. And we were going to fly to Northern California, and we were going to meet with his family office. Mm-hmm. Steve Case had some stuff he was doing. It was going to take longer, and we would have had to fly back east. Mm-hmm. And the business still needed us because we were doing all those deliveries and everything. Mm-hmm. So we said, okay, we'll go and visit the people at Omidyar Network. And we took all our numbers up there, and they said, this is great. We're interested. And so they came in and invested more money. And you said they invested $670-ish thousand. Mm-hmm. And we had a few meetings with them. In the last meeting, they said, is there anything else you need? And Howard Schultz had invested in eBay. Mm-hmm. And we said, we need a meeting with Howard Schultz. That's the only other thing we ever asked for from them. So they were great. So and they put the guy who was the head of their family office on our board.
Got it.
Yeah, Mike was amazing. So
and that was the last money you'd ever raised.
Correct. So we got the meeting
less than $1 million.
Correct. So we got the meeting with Howard Schultz, and Howard. I learned something from him. We went and had this PowerPoint. He had his office on this beautiful window looking out over all of Seattle, downtown Seattle, mm-hmm. from SoDo, which is the place where the headquarters is for Starbucks. Next door, he had a conference room. And so this was where I think maybe they didn't have board meetings there. It was just his conference room. So we went up, we had our PowerPoint presentation, we had our product, our story, everything ready. And he walked in, he goes, what's all this? We said, we're ready to tell you about Ethos. And he said, let's just go have a cup of coffee and talk in my office. So he picked up a bottle and walked in there and sat down and said, tell me about your company. Slides are still being shown on the wall in the other room. And so I just started telling him the story that we've talked about here. I'm in South Africa, I'm in England. Origin story. And walk him all the way up to the approach to the business and how we built distribution. And at this point, I think we had just gotten cost plus world market. So they were shipping our product out across the United States to like 800 stores. And so what he did was he realized the power that he had as a CEO, but he also realized that he needed to sell it to everybody else. So he said, Nancy, get so-and-so on the phone. So Nancy would get this person on the phone and he would say, hey, come to the office. I want you to hear something. And he just had us tell this story to like 10 other people. Over.
Same day.
While we were sitting there. And so by the time we left that day, everybody who mattered had listened to this story in front of him in his office.
Did any of them know about you already because you had been doing all the other work on the other side?
I don't think so.
So these were all fresh people.
Wow. I mean, I think maybe we had not met the level of direct reports mm-hmm. who we met that day, mm-hmm. who were all somehow, by hook or by crook, going to have some kind of involvement in this. Mm-hmm. And so shortly thereafter, they got back to us and said, we're interested. And then after about 4 months of, they put a gun to your head and say, give us all your numbers, show us, everything down to the 10th of a penny about how much your product costs. what's the price at which you want to sell it to us? And they do that because they have power. They do that. They own the stores, so they do it with everybody. So at the end of this period, they came back to us and said, we want to buy Ethos, the company, from you, the brand. We don't want you to be a supplier. And so this was a phone call we got from them, and we didn't want to sell the company because the money for us and the control for us and the accomplishment of what we were doing was on the realization of a distribution strategy. But they had already been through this with umpteen other companies. And the CMO at the time said, we're not going to build another company so somebody else can get rich. So they wanted to take what we had built and get all the benefit from the profit that they were going to add to it through their stores. And they said, you can either sell the company to us or the conversation's over.
So what did you do?
So
we know what you did.
So we went back and
what did you do?
So we went back and talked to our investors and we said, this is where we stand. And they said, well, what do you think? And I said, look, when we originally pitched this business to you, there's a few different ways we can build it. And at this point, having been through this, I know that if we don't get Starbucks or a significant portion of their competitors, which is going to take a much longer period of time, without having the presence in on-premise sales, we can't sell to grocery stores, and we can't build a business that will survive in our product category in Whole Foods. The biggest water brand at the time was just bleeding money. And I had known other guys in the beverage business. Jones Soda, you remember that company?
Yeah. Out of Cali.
I think they're being reborn now because they're making like Jones Soda with THC in it or something.
Yeah, Mary Jones.
Right. But Jones Soda was a $50 million company that had never taken a penny out of the business. So I didn't want to spend 15 years doing this, driving a station wagon to Whole Foods. And I also didn't want my company to fail.
Yeah.
That was the most important thing.
Yeah.
That mid-year people said, look, what do you think? And I said, I think we will never be able to make this work if we don't get Starbucks. And we can't get Starbucks if we don't sell the business.
The value is in their distribution, right? Putting you in every single Starbucks store. But how do they figure out how to pay you for that?
Well, that is the brand that they believed in.
It's funny.
But they know it.
What I can tell you guys is what I think part of it was that they had enough people who were consumer goods people and first of all, I think Howard loved the brand.
Right. Got it.
And the brand and so to go back to that earlier point, you look at Nantucket Nectars, you look at Ben & Jerry's, all these companies have co-founders who have a mission, and the mission's written on the product and their signatures are on the product. And we had borrowed that lesson from all those people, but that was also intrinsically important, I think, to this being successful. Now, what we didn't know at the time was that the minute that Pepsi found out about this, because Pepsi makes all of the CPG RTD products through a joint venture with Starbucks, is within weeks or days, they had a deck in front of Starbucks saying, we can make this product and we think you should only give away, like a third of a penny per bottle or something like that. So it was all about the economics for them. It was all about the mission for us.
Yeah.
So we were trying to drive as much of the value into the donation as possible. And so that's something that happened. The discussion about how much would be donated happened after the acquisition.
Got it.
And we were donating out of our coffers at the time. We weren't profitable.
Yeah.
So we were just giving away money to not-for-profit organizations out of cash.
Got it.
But the moment that Starbucks bought this company, the production costs go, to nothing.
Yeah.
And they're selling the product for nearly $2 a bottle. So we inherit all the margins that Crystal Geyser had. And in that meeting with Howard, he said, I've always hated Crystal Geyser. And I love this idea and this product and the design.
Yeah, it's such a shit brand. It's
So-
a huge difference.
Crystal guys are not Ethos.
No,
Just making sure the audience is made that.
So it was,
but I still don't know how did they come up with the number to give you.
we talked about it.
And you just there was a number in your head that you figured it was worth, or was it
We negotiated with our investors with them.
what their return needed to be, what you guys needed?
I think it was just like,
I'm just trying to get into the room. Like I wish I was a fly on the wall. This is so exciting.
you know,
I feel like I'm in a movie.
I think that we came to the point where they were like, what? I think they still thought we might not do this, and they wanted this. But also, if you do the math on it, we were going to increase their profitability immediately as well, and they were going to have a good story to tell.
So it was a way to calculate number of bottles they were going to sell. You knew instinctively that you could.
They were buying something that would immediately make a return on the mission.
Yeah, the calculus made
and
sense.
on the profitability. So, and also it wasn't a big thing for them. They're buying a product that's replacing something that involves no labor. So if you look at Starbucks, it's a quick serve restaurant business that also has other products. They sell more milk volumetrically than they do coffee. So, labor and healthcare are much more important factors than the beans in their profitability. So there's a lot that goes into the way that they think about stuff that isn't necessarily obvious. Now, if we'd been negotiating with Pepsi or Coke, it would have been very different.
Yeah. Well, also, I think the thing that I want to make sure to underscore for the audience here, which, I'm either going to swing and miss big, or I think I'm going to hit the ball, but I think I'm going to hit the ball, which is you had a CEO that the entire concept of Starbucks came when he was traveling around and looking for that concept of the next home, right? So he was bought into that mindset of, bootstrapping, entrepreneurship, experience transformation. So as a result of it, he saw a way to essentially inherit a brand that he believed in, that was built in the same image that he built that brand in, that we know today. And I think that as a result of it, he was bought in and he wanted to make it happen, versus a Pepsi who it was just another thing that got spit out of, some agency's, cutting room floor. So for me, like, I feel like the emotional connection that you both had to this business ultimately is what led to the culmination. That's just me, again, armchair quarterbacking it, but would you say that that's real? Because from what I've read about Howard Schultz and people that I know have worked at Starbucks and some of the agencies he's employed, he seems like that kind of person.
Yeah, I think Howard is a great salesman, and he's a great marketer. And, evidenced by the way that he sold us to his employees, right? But I think he also understood, like, Starbucks is a big company. It's not like if you're at Pepsi, you have a headquarters in Purchase, New York, and everybody works there, and then you have distributors, but all they have to do is distribute. The Starbucks partners in the stores have to believe in stuff. They have to love it and feel good about it and get excited about it. Because the average tenure of a Starbucks barista is only 6.5 months. So while they're there, they need to be excited. And I think Ethos was, and so if you look at the companies that they've acquired, outside of like buying 50 coffee shops in Boston or
The La Boulange, or
right.
what it was called. Right?
But if you look at the businesses that they bought, the businesses they buy are built by people who love what they're doing.
Craft.
Yeah. Who are monomaniacally focused on, their mission might be bread, or it might be tea like Tazo, or it might be, making ultra high-end filtered coffee like they had this company they bought when I was there.
But they're obsessed.
Whatever it is, there's some person at the center of that business who's obsessed and will kill or die to make whatever they're doing happen.
And that was you and Jonathan.
Correct.
How did you guarantee that they were going to hold up your mission?
We wrote it into the purchase agreement, but probably more importantly, we announced it.
So they had to stick to it. You knew once they put it out there.
We wanted to make it, we wanted to sell the product for more than they wanted to sell it for.
How much money did you have left in the bank when you made the deal? Were you out of cash, or were you still flush from the 360 out of 670?
We took a bridge loan to get to the deal.
So the 600,000 was already gone, and they had to get a bridge.
Well, I think we would have raised more money, but once we got into the funnel, Then doing the deal took a while.
It's hard to raise money when you're doing $150,000 a year, though. You've already raised almost $1 million. How do you convince somebody?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things about building consumer goods businesses.
Yeah.
The guy, an interesting guy for you to talk to would be the guy who founded Liquid Death.
Yeah, it's funny. I was going to mention Liquid Death, but I didn't want to steal any of the sunshine from.
No, I just read an article about him.
Yeah.
Or talking about his business a couple of days ago, and the similarities, despite the glaring differences between Ethos and Liquid Death, the similarities in terms of creating something that is ultimately fundamentally very different and speaks to a very specific group of people are pretty obvious.
Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally the two things that I think that both those brands have in common, like to the T, is the positioning and the packaging, and how much that traversed culture in a very different way than the big majors are doing, right? It's like, I actually teach, I have a slide in my brand strategy presentation where on the left side, it's a shitty unnamed water bottle, and the right side, it's Liquid Death. And the slide before that, it shows what looks like a beer can. I go around the room and say, what do you see on the slide? It's all blacked out. And they say a beer can, and then I click the slide and it shows Liquid Death. But again, it's the packaging, the positioning, and the story, right? And that's something that, like, that's how I've made my living for a long time. So take us through that moment.
Yeah, I was going to say, so you're on your bridge round, you cut the deal, your investors say it's a go, you guys are happy with the deal, you sign. What was that moment like? Do you remember where you were?
I was in my 1-bedroom apartment where I was in the crappiest place you could find in Santa Monica.
Well, at least Santa Monica.
My neighbors, I think to a person, were either community college students or did not speak English.
Yeah.
And so it's like a dark, uninspiring place. And I get the phone call, and I called Jonathan, and I said, the deal is done. I'll see you in about 20 minutes. So I went outside and got in my truck and drove to his house. And along the way, I picked up a bottle of, I don't know, the best champagne that I could find between our two houses, and got some plastic bottles or plastic glasses. And we sat on his doorstep and drank a glass of champagne. He doesn't like wine. No. He doesn't like champagne. So I forced him to drink a glass of champagne. So we sat there for about half an hour. Mm-hmm. And then he said, I got to go in and change my son's diaper. and I said, I got to go back to the office because we have orders to deliver.
Yeah.
And that was the moment where...
Right back to work.
Because it's interesting, like the deal was such that we stayed in Santa Monica.
Yeah.
We kept our customer base. We kept serving everybody we were serving. And most importantly, I was still on a mission. That didn't change for me.
Mm.
The mission was just now delivered because the company could make profits. It could take, we were giving away the equivalent of 1.9 cents a bottle, and Starbucks, despite the fact that I wanted them to make it 10 cents, made it 5, and it has been to this day. Mm-hmm. So now it was like 7,000 stores at the time, or 5,000 company-owned stores at the time. And in the interim, it's 20,000 stores and all of their licensed stores.
And talk about the impact for a second now. Let's just, for the audience, like, what is that 5 cents a bottle equated to in terms of impact?
It's definitely, millions of people, millions of lives that have been impacted now. I don't have the access to the data anymore. There was a point at the very beginning, we went to the CFO. I'll tell you the post-acquisition story. We went to the CFO and said, like, you guys are doing this because of two things. It makes sense economically for your company, and because it makes sense relative to the Starbucks brand. Like, our brand is like a good baby in the basket of the Starbucks brand of house of brands. But if you want that second part to be really good, what we should do is make an announcement that we're going to give away a large amount of money, not the accumulation of nickels, but rather make a commitment. So we said, here's what you guys are doing in terms of volume. Here's our projections over the next number of years. Commit to giving away $5 million. And they did that. And that was based on them having a healthy business, right? So they were making a much bigger commitment than they would be making if they just let it trickle along. but also it made for a much better press announcement. So I think our real moment, which is the moment you were talking about, wasn't when the money was wired. Because for most entrepreneurs, it's when the money hits your bank account and you're like, I can relax after this, baton death march of building a company. But for me, it was more when we did the press announcement, we flew to New York. Or no, actually, we didn't fly there. We knew that we had to engage all the Starbucks employees. So we bought a Winnebago and had it painted blue, wrapped in this blue thing that said Ethos Water. And then we drove all around the country and went to Starbucks stores. And the communications group at Starbucks was awesome. And we went to stores in every place and we would give a speech. They would have all the partners come. We would do a walk for water like the women do in the developing world. And then having crossed the country, we did the press launch in New York.
Got it.
And we went on, I don't remember what, CBS or something like that. But we were walking across Times Square from our hotel, and there were people carrying Ethos water bottles in Times Square because there's like 30 Starbucks stores over in Times Square. And so people were buying our product for the first time because it was the first day where the product was on sale. So for me, it was the realization, like the idea of democratizing philanthropy and putting it in the hands of the consumer had ultimately been realized in a country with 300 million people.
Wow. That's heavy.
Wow.
And, I got to see it happening.
Yeah.
And I knew I was going to a news show, but for me, talking to the press was a lot less exciting than seeing the individual people carrying the brand,
No.
And I think that, the money part of it is one thing and the affecting millions of people is another thing. But I think that at the time, if you looked at surveys that had been done about what people thought were important problems in the world, Americans didn't think that the world water crisis was important at all. And it was because of the fact that they didn't have a problem with water.
It wasn't real for us, right?
Well, I was just going to bring it together. The same reason why they won't invest in you until they can see your problem, until you can see your product. Like people need to see it. It's I don't know why. You could tell somebody a story about these developing countries not having water, but until they actually are there and see someone with a bucket of water on their head, traversing the streets or the hills that they have to do.
Well, it's like health,
Same
right?
thing for you. It's like no one would invest in your business until they saw the bottle filled with water. I remember going back to the very beginning days of building this building. It was a dungeon. It was a dark garage, bus depot with water dripping and holes in the broken glass and oil spots on the concrete. And I used to walk people through and just be like, oh, there's going to be a beer garden, there's going to be people, and there's going to be tech companies and VCs and this and that. And I thought that they believed me, only to find out years later that they thought I was crazy. Nobody, and that's why nobody gave us money. No banks would fund us, none of this stuff, because they couldn't see it.
Right.
And then once we started to actually move the needle, start building stuff, start opening stuff, all of a sudden everybody wanted to be a part of the project in some capacity. And I just think it's so in line with your funding story all the way through to this moment. It's like until you see it, it doesn't become an issue for people, or it doesn't become a reality for people.
I think that is probably one of the most important things that, the business I'm running right now, Muse it's a website builder that also has, offers the ability for companies to build a very simple version of a product called Notion. So you can collaborate and work with people in teams with this product. Now, of the first thousands of customers that we have, probably half of them are students. So I talk to college students all the time for the last year. And I think there are a lot of college students who are kind of like what you said earlier. They're entrepreneurs, but their parents are at home saying, go into finance, go into private equity,
Get off my
go work for a hedge fund. And I think, Scott Galloway, when he says, go get good at something and do that thing, don't go pursue your dreams. I think that for the majority of people, that's good advice. but it's terrible advice for the people who are willing to run through walls to get something done. And I think that like self-knowledge, like knowing who you are and willingness to take risks of certain kinds is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Having a parent pass away, I think, helps you to, whether you know it or not,
Yeah.
you know that you don't fear things, right? And I think the other thing is, if you have an idea, do it. Just go do it. Make it. Show it to somebody.
Wisely said. So you started to bring up Muse, but just for half a second, you transform illegal AK-47s from African war zones into luxury items too?
Yes.
I think that just to kind of make sure that we don't lose it on our audience here, who's going to be tuning in from all over the world, is you might have completed that mission, but
Right.
the mission-driven entrepreneur in you hasn't left you. And ultimately, on one of your final trips at Starbucks, something happened for you that went on to found Foundry 47. I'd love for you to tell the audience more about that, because it's one thing to start a mission and impact-driven business. It's another thing to have that be the fabric of who you are.
Right.
It doesn't leave you even once you've had that big moment, which you already had. So when did the moment happen to find Foundry 47? Tell the audience what it is and inspire us all with that. We'll put some images and clips up in the process.
Sure. There are two businesses I founded. One of them as a result of my last trip to Africa to visit. We were going to Kenya and to Tanzania, where we had funded water projects for altogether about 200,000 people. And Kenya, our trip was planned around Christmas in 2007, I think. And they had election violence, and a lot of people were murdered because two people wanted to be president and neither person wanted to concede. And so it became a tribal thing, and people were burned to death in churches and so forth. And so all of a sudden, lots of people had firearms, and we were visiting one of the water projects. We delayed our trip about 6 months later and saw little kids carrying AK-47s, and the guns were bigger than the kids.
It's wild.
And so it was this moment where, kind of like being in South Africa, I realized there must be a way to take the most famous gun in the world and make something out of it. And so that became the idea for Foundry 47, or the inspiration, where it was like, how do you take this industrial product that was originally designed in the Soviet Union, and then was, because it was a communist country, it got produced everywhere in the world because they gave away the design to all their, satellite countries.
So you turned beautiful violence.
Right. So the idea was like, take this thing, take the metal from it, and take African assault rifles and then make them into beautiful art, luxury goods, and so forth. And so it took us about 1.5 years to find a way to get AK-47s in Africa and get them out. And then ultimately we went to Nigeria, we went to multiple different countries, and then we ended up getting them in the Congo, having them destroyed by a guy heating them up over a fire with charcoal and then pounding them into bits and sawing them up. And then we carried them out in our luggage once they were destroyed.
You're missing a piece of the story, though. How did you get AK-47s?
We bought them
Off children?
No, we bought them from we bought seized illegal guns that had been seized from poachers in, the forests in Eastern Congo where the guerrillas live. There's a lot of poaching there.
Yeah.
And so the rangers collect weapons from poachers, and they actually have lots of gun battles with them.
Got it.
This is also where all the gold and the coltan and the diamonds are that are.
Yeah. Feels like Blood Diamond movie, but about something different.
So, Tanzania, is it Tanzania? No.
Tanzanite is a red stone, but
Oh, okay. But isn't it, I'm trying to think of the jungle. What is I just saw the jungle where the gorillas are. What is the name of that jungle? Isn't it like
The Congo?
No, but I thought there was, maybe it doesn't matter. For another time.
so this is all around
Put it in the
the
show notes.
Great Lakes of the Eastern Congo, and we went to Bukavu and to Goma,
Yeah.
and spent a month there with a war photographer who's a great guy, still friends. And he was our protector because he was a New York Times war photographer who'd been in Afghanistan and Iraq for a decade. And he said, how close do you want to get? And so we would go within kilometers of combat, but not close enough to be in combat. And on that trip, we didn't get anything, but we bought a lot of beer for soldiers, and we met a lot of people. And then ultimately, about 6 months later, we ended up going back and getting these weapons and then carrying them out across the border through to Rwanda and checked our luggage and flew home.
And you've destroyed over 72,000 assault rifles?
That's right.
Wow.
In Congo, Burundi, and Rwanda.
Who buys the luxury items? Who's the audience?
Luxury
People?
buyers.
Yeah.
They make pens, watches, jewelry, objet.
Okay. And that's been going on since 2009, still happening today?
Correct.
And Liberty
We're making
United.
watches right now in Switzerland. If you have a spare $100,000, I can get you one.
Okay. Yeah, I don't, but maybe
Sell the building.
sell my next business that I sell for sure.
Or just sell some of the watches you had. You've got some pretty expensive watches.
I do have, I have some nice watches for sure.
Liberty United, talk a little bit about that.
Liberty United was
Similar business, right?
similar idea, but born right around the time my wife said, we should do this in the United States. We just had a baby. Our daughter was born. And then, as you guys know, because you're in Connecticut, the shootings at Sandy Hook happened.
Yeah.
And so we then came up with the idea for Liberty United, partnered with police departments all around the United States. They have guns in evidence rooms that they collect from crime.
Or the buybacks programs, and
Yeah,
stuff
both
like
of
that.
those.
too?
And
yeah.
then they'll take those weapons and have them destroyed. So they'll either bring them to a metal smelting place or to a place that grinds up metal. And so we just went and made partnerships with them and said, here, you'll give us the money and you'll pick a not-for-profit that works with kids here in your community, and we'll make jewelry out of this and then give your not-for-profit the money back.
Love that.
And so we have partnerships with police departments in New Orleans, Chicago, Philadelphia, and New York. And we've funded programs for over 6,000 kids.
So both of these companies are nonprofits, I'm assuming.
They're for-profit businesses.
Oh, they're still
Yeah.
for profit.
Yeah.
They're impact driven.
But there's so the way I set up a for-profit company and then alongside it a not-for-profit so the company can give money to a nonprofit.
Got it. And you can, yeah.
And then I control both of them, but the nonprofit is the part of the machine that gives away the money.
Got it.
And I started doing this before people started founding B Corps.
Yeah.
I looked at B Corps, but it seemed kind of bureaucratic and a little bit like you're just trying to run a company. It's a lot of work,
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
So I'm super curious because your latest venture that you're doing today as the CEO and co-founder is Muse, the AI platform, which I want you to talk a little bit about. I'm a tech nerd, but I'm a tech nerd, I'm a brand nerd, but I also love mission and impact driven businesses. I'm really, really curious because if you said after Foundry 47 and Liberty United, you started another mission impact driven business, it would make total sense to me. But how do you go from water to war zones to jewelry,
right?
To a no-code platform? Like, how did that idea hit you and make you want to start this most recent business as an entrepreneur?
So one of my investors in two of my companies, Foundry 47 and Liberty United, was my co-founder, Dan Sutera. He's a 10-time, this is his 10th company. Well, 9 of those have been tech companies. One was a nonprofit. And he came up with the idea for Muse and showed it to me. And
what's the big why behind Muse? Like, why do we need another Notion, no-code, low-code platform?
The idea for this product was that anybody can use it. So if you look at a lot of these products, that isn't true. So your kid can't use most of these products and your mom can't use most of them. And anyone with any level of technological capability can use Muse. So it's a freemium business. We have paying customers, but that's also true of people in developing countries. So let's say take somebody like Muhammad Yunus, who has these women sewing collectives all across Bangladesh. Those women can now build a website for free and market their products in the United States. They don't need to know code. They don't need to know design, because our product functions sort of like you have a magazine editor sitting on your shoulder. So you don't have to have the training that somebody who goes to RISD has, or somebody who goes and studies code. Now,
So tech, essentially democratized tech for people of all education levels is the new water in some cases. And then as a result of it, you're delivering that currency to them.
yes. I mean, because of climate change, water is the new water as well. But I think that's exactly right. Like, I think that AI is changing this very quickly.
Certainly heat shit up. And I mean that literally and figuratively.
Correct.
Well, the CEO of NVIDIA said, I hate to be the person in the room that busts everybody's bubble, but we shouldn't be telling people to go and learn how to code anymore. He said, if we're doing our jobs correctly, then anybody should be able to code.
That's happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you watch your feed or you
Yeah.
type AI and
It's usually posts from me. That
daily.
he's using it.
He's like, what he just said, you should consider talking to him, because he's like Mr. AI. He was Mid-Journey before anybody. He I don't know, if it was 3-4 years ago or something. And you said, look at this Slack channel it's called Mid-Journey. And nobody was even talking about AI at the time.
So it's been very interesting to have started a business
Because you started well before all this OpenAI, ChatGPT nonsense.
about a year and a half. And so we've added AI to our product. But what's interesting is that
People don't want AI. They just want the benefits of what it delivers. That's what I'm finding with a lot of my work.
it's sort of like driverless cars. So if you watch the genesis and growth of driverless cars,
My friend is the CTO of Driver Technologies.
there are a lot of people who are weirded out if they get in a car and there's no steering wheel. So our product is sort of like the old world meets the new world, to the extent that when you can generate whole pages or sections of pages using AI, but when you're done, you have a steering wheel.
Yep.
And so you can manipulate that content, change it, whatever you want.
Is a fair metaphor, Peter, to say I can give a kid a box of Legos with a picture on the side of the box, and ultimately what they build might not be the picture on the side of the box, but they're going to achieve whatever they want to build with that. Is it fair to say that Muse is doing that with people?
We use the analogy of Legos a lot.
I had no idea. I've never seen your product. Sorry, I probably haven't seen that, but I will be digging in. So
Yeah, it is Lego-like construction. And it's actually...
by Lego, I don't just be clear for the audience. I don't mean Lego in the sense of modularity. I mean Lego in the sense that what you might give people the tools to build and what they actually might build with it, there's a very, very big variance between the two. And that's what I think is really powerful when you remove the technical factor or the barrier that some people have. Like if I use Softer or Airtable or, Bardeen or many of these tools that are like letting me tap into all these technologies or stringing them together with low code, it's very different because I know what I'm trying to do. But if you give me all those tools and now I can build a web page, build a wiki, build a notes database for a college student, now you've given me Legos. It's not just modularity, you've given me possibility.
Yes, I think that's a big part of it. I think that you can build whatever you want and configure it however you want. I think at the same time, not coding there's another side of that coin, which is not having to know how to make something look nice. And so we've tried to remove as much of the aspect of making design mistakes as you can. And so when we were talking about the way that this product would feel when you use it, I went back and said, I was talking to engineers who were born long after Walt Disney died, but I was like, if you think about the way that the Disney
Imagineers,
the cartoonists made cartoons look, it looked like when water was flowing, it looked like water flowing. If something organic was moving, it looked like it was real. And so I said, when we move a block on the page, I want the block that it bumps into to look like it's bumping out of the way and move in an organic fashion. So it doesn't feel like moving pallets in a warehouse. It feels like moving a plant, then another plant, or a leaf or a lily pad, so that it feels like you're touching something that is kind of alive.
Organic design principle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I can't wait to play with it. What's the most common use cases for the tool? And the audience, you mentioned college kids is a big one for that.
So 2 categories generally. I want to sell myself or sell something I make or an idea.
Okay.
Or I want to work with people on stuff in private. And our product does both of those. So this is, for lack of a better term, Squarespace for dummies. And this is Notion for dummies. And so
with a little bit of a Gumroad element too, right?
Yes. Now I was on a call today about e-commerce, and e-commerce will be out soon.
Great.
You can make things. We have integrations where you can make money now, but we'll actually make it possible for you to say, okay, I want to sell my PDF or my video series about how to run a podcast.
But I don't need Stripe or Lemon Squeezy to do it with the future of Muse. I can do it all built into Muse.
Stripe is integrated, so you'll be able to add your own Stripe to our account, but you'll also be able to see all your own customers and data. So if you sell something on our product, you'll be able to see who bought it, when they bought it, how much they paid you, all that stuff.
What I always tell my CEO clients to do is don't sell me on the product or the use case, sell me on the transformation. So tell the audience, when you've achieved your vision and with your co-founder for Muse, what's the world look like that it doesn't look like today?
Everybody everywhere will be able to do whatever they want on the web, and it'll be fun. And it'll be the vision, I think, that people had in between 1989 and 1995, where the web was like the Wild West, and it was, remember?
I do.
Like when you would go and like just spend time looking at stuff.
Yeah, I had the best MySpace page on the planet. Let me just say that. So
I think that so you have this bifurcation where you have all these really complicated tools that are built to get over the CTO SaaS threshold. Then you have social media over here, which is really easy and wide reaching, but you can't do a lot.
Yep.
So you can post a picture or make a comment, and it all is in a vertical thread, and they want to sell you ads. They want your eyes to consume ads.
Working for the social media company.
Right. And so Muse is something in between that, where you can make stuff really easily, and you can reach people, but you can make things as easily as, so you can make a page as easily as you would make a tweet. And with AI, we've reduced the amount of energy that you have to invest in making that page by 1,800 times.
Amazing. I love that. So essentially it's the Steve Jobs effect, right? It's like what the power he gave everyone in terms of the creator economy back then, before we called it that. When everyone had an iPhone in their hand, we got to do things that, now we can do things that people who spent 5 years in Photoshop can't do at the click of a button.
Right.
You're really empowering people with that. So I love that. That's a fantastic place for us, I think, to wrap. We've taken so much of your time.
I was just going to say, this was fascinating. You are the epitome of a business hacker. I loved it because I fancy myself a business hacker, right? I'm not a technologist, but I know how technology works, but I understand, and I learned from my co-founder here and co-host and partner in crime here, what a hacker really is. And I've learned how to do a lot with a little, and it's very apparent that you've hacked your way through to these amazing feats, and this has just been a wonderful opportunity to sit here with you. I just wanted to say that.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Where do folks go to follow you? Obviously, we're going to include all your companies and all these stories in the show notes, as always, folks. But for those that want to just follow the way your mind works, any books, any different things, any writing, like where do we go to follow you and tune in? Because I know I myself selfishly want to do so now too.
Find me on LinkedIn. So follow me there. And you can find me on our platform at muse.io/Peter.
Awesome. Sounds great.
Very cool.
We'd love to get on a first name basis. So.
And you got to Pete's going to give you he's going to look at the muse.io, and I think he's going to put something out about it, because that's what he does. He finds all the AI tools and talks about them. So I think
I've got to get your podcast hosted on Muse.
No, listen, say less. We can figure that out.
We can also generate podcast notes for you guys, for all your
I love it.
listeners.
We'd love that.
Fantastic.
We're using GPT-4 for that right now, but we'd love to replace it with your tool. On that note, thanks everybody, as always, for tuning in to Forward Obsessed. Please make sure to throw us a like and subscribe on all the platforms. We'd love your reviews and love to continue to get that feedback. Keep shooting on notes to forwardobsessed.com. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Forward Obsessed. Please share this episode, subscribe, and leave a review on your podcast app. If you have feedback or suggestions for our next guest, visit us at forwardobsessed.com. If you want to dive deeper into every interview, subscribe to our Substack at forwardobsessed.substack.com. Also, find us on Instagram or TikTok at forwardobsessed to see all the best moments from every episode. This episode was produced by Robert Roach from District Studios in New Haven, Connecticut. If you would like to learn more about the team that makes this show possible, visit digitalsurgeons.com.